Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about coping with code that fails in production. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, Frederick, do you have any practical advice for how to cope with when your code fails in production? And the quick answer is you just have to muddy through, guys. That's it. You have to fuck up enough so that you stop feeling so bad about it, because that's the only way. I will also say that it helps a lot if you, at an emotional level, feel that you did everything you could to avoid it from happening, but there's no way that you're going to just magically stop feeling bad about it. If you feel bad about it, because it's not a positive thing to know that you are responsible for an outage or something like that. But the way that I usually handle this is that first and foremost, I have a checklist that I always tick off before I do a release, and I highly recommend anybody who's doing any type of professional work to do this sort of thing. It is very, very useful because there's a million things going on all the time, and there's someone over here who needs some help with something, and there's a bug over there that needs to get done, and then you need to do the release at the same time as your boss asks you about your opinion about something. There's tons of these things that go on, right? And I don't know how many times I've been forced to be spread across multiple things at the same time, and then I forget to do all the things that I need to do, and then I release something, and usually when I release something, it's going to fail from some obvious thing or something that could have been caught at an earlier stage, right? So I highly recommend you to create your own checklist and just go through each item before you do a release, always. And I even go one further. I actually do this at the story level. Like, the first thing I will do when I start on a story is to wear what Martin Fowler calls the different hats. So my first hat is always going to be the stakeholder hat, or the specification hat, where I just walk through the story and I read through it very thoroughly, and I check all the artboards, or if we have artboards, and then I just list out every single question that I can possibly think of as a list of questions that I need answering. And by the end of that, I have dissected, from my perspective, as much as I can, the specifications of the story to figure out every single thing that I can. And then I basically go and I start asking questions to my stakeholders, and they better have an answer to all of these questions, because if I don't have an answer to these questions, I will just tell them that I can sort of start working on certain things here, or I can't, and you need to answer these questions, right? Said and done. Once that's been done, I have a sort of checklist is going there. Then I do my development work, and things change and things progress, and then finally I have my tester hat on, and I do the same thing. I really go, like, I have the mindset that I'm going to test this as if I was paid for how many bugs I can find, and that's basically how I go through it. So I find all kinds of issues usually with this approach. And then I make it, of course, very clear that that doesn't mean that we're going to fix every single little thing that I find, but I still need to find it. And then lastly, I have the release master, or like the releasing hat on, where I go through the same sort of thing here, where I make sure that, okay, I check all the channels. Has anybody said, like, don't release things because something is broken, etc., etc.? What status are the clusters in, and so forth and so forth and so forth. And then, of course, I always make sure that I can roll back, so that if something breaks, I can always, like, undo it, because that's the first thing that you should be doing. At least this helps me cope with it when something does happen. And with this approach that I just told you, it is very rare that it happens. It's these lists and, like, having these different hats at the different stages has helped me a lot to reduce down the outages that I've caused myself to a bare minimum, right? But when it does happen, focus on solving the issue. Don't, like, freeze up or anything like that. The first thing that you should do is to get the application back to a working state as quickly as humanly possible. And usually that is easiest done by just rolling back, if that's at all possible. If you can't do that at your job, try your best to figure out a way to have that ability, because it is an enormously, it's a great security emotionally if you know that you can undo the work that you've actually pushed out into production, right? So once the bug is fixed and so forth, and everything is working, I start to reflect a little bit. And usually you do this in a form of post-mortem or something like that, and you really think about, okay, what went wrong, why did it go wrong, and what can we change in the future? And well, depending of course on the answer that I get to this question, I might update one of my processes, my internal process, about having these to-dos or these checklists, right? And then finally I sit and I think about the fact that now I pretty much have done, like I feel confident in that I have done every single thing that I could have humanly possibly done in order to avoid this from happening. And the last little bit there, that last little uncertainty that we have, that is human error, or that is something that will never ever go away, because every single human being makes mistakes. But we can reduce them down to the bare minimum. So yeah, these are, and apart from this, it comes down to personal security, and you achieve this personal security through going through this process. The more times you fuck up, basically, the more confident you're going to feel, and the less sensitive you will be towards criticisms and guilt and so forth when these sorts of things actually happen. And it's not a fun journey to get there, but it is something that we all have to go through. So what I want you to take away from this is that in order for you to cope, at least how I cope with breaking production, is number one, make sure that you have a personal process that makes it almost impossible that you will do this. Make sure that you take your work serious enough to have a checklist, to find your own weaknesses and make sure that you're going through things in the same fashion over and over so you get consistent results. Secondly, make sure that when the thing actually happens, focus all your attention on undoing the damage that you have just done, so that you can as quickly as possible mitigate the problem. Because if you have a really serious problem, it feels much worse than if you had a small problem that you could just roll back immediately. And then lastly, remember that you're not perfect. Everybody makes mistakes. And there is no way for you to never ever break production. You will at some point. It's inevitable. Everybody does it. And when that happens, you will feel bad about it, and you will probably do it more than once. But remember that as you improve these practices that I've told you about, you will feel less and less guilty about it and be more and more focused on actually solving the problem, because feeling guilty about it doesn't really help anybody. It's just something that stops you from solving the problem and growing as a developer. Have a great day.